Hi guys, so here's part two. I'm still up on my soapbox, and it's just gonna get worse and worse now. Because these last two things are the most egregious as far as I'm concerned. Society is failing disabled and mentally ill people. So my next issue is the lack of supportive housing. And this exists in so many countries. They close down the big institutions, which is a good thing. Okay, I understand it's a good thing. I've had people who think I'm saying they should open those up again when I say that. So no, good thing. They are not good places. People deserve to live within the community, not, warehoused off in a field and being abused. Okay? When they closed down those institutions, they didn't put anything in place. In the city of Toronto, 55% of the homeless population has some sort of disability, mental illness, addiction, something medical, or disabling going on of some description. 55%, more than half. Now, the biggest reason for that is money, which I'll be getting to in my last part. But the other issue is there's little to no supportive housing. So I'll tell you, I live in, sorry, I'm looking at notes. I live in York Region, which is you could call it the county north of Toronto. And when I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, I naively thought that I would be able to get into some sort of supportive housing now that I had a serious mental illness diagnosis. I found out that two things exist in York Region. One is a big old house they divided up where you get your own room and you have to share the kitchen and bathrooms. The other program they have, you share with just one roommate your own apartment, and someone comes by, excuse me, once a week. They said they'll help you make a budget, write a shopping list, that kind of thing. Okay, so first of all, I understand if I was in a really bad home life situation or I was homeless, I would live in one of those programs. Okay, fine. But I don't, so that would actually be a step down for me. What I want is to be able to move into my own apartment. And the kind of support I'm looking for, I need help with cleaning, getting to errands and appointments. I know how to make a budget. I know how to write a grocery list. I don't. That's not useful in any way, shape, or form. I am going to ask because I have physical disabilities now, fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome, if that qualifies me for anything. But I seriously doubt it does. Because you see homeless people in wheelchairs, you see people with severe physical disabilities living in long term care with the elderly, because that's the only way for them to get the medical and nursing care that they need. Um, so I doubt those additional diagnoses will get me anything. But I'm going to ask anyway at some point. Um, what I would like to see is in theory, not in practice, because in practice, our long term care system is a disaster right now. Absolutely appalling. In theory, though, what I would like to see is the same kind of thing with different levels. So some people, and not just this is not just mental illness. There's all types of mental disorders, physical disabilities are overrepresented in the homeless population. Autism. I've seen statistics for autism and mental illness. Wouldn't be surprised if there's overrepresentation of things like ADHD, learning disabilities, all different, probably fetal alcohol syndrome, probably that a lot, or spectrum disorder, I should say. So, what I would like to see, since there are so many different types of people with so many different needs, is a multi tiered system like exists for the elderly, right? So, on one end of the spectrum would be like the people who have their own apartments and somebody comes by to help them. The other end of the spectrum would be analogous to the dementia care that exists for the elderly, where it's more like a hospital setting where they have maybe their own room, but mostly they're congregated into common areas. And then there's levels in between as well. It's not just those two extremes. That's what I would like to see exist for people with mental illness and other mental disorders. All that exists right now is for people with intellectual disability, low IQ. There are group homes for people, those individuals, and day programs. There's not enough. The wait lists are very long, but at least they exist, which is admittedly a very low bar. But here, this is where we're at. At least they exist. Anybody else falls through the cracks. My own brother actually lives in a privately run building where he has his own apartment and workers come in to support him. And our family had no idea that it would be that hard to find him housing. We thought he has an autism spectrum diagnosis. When he's ready to move out, we're sure there's some program we can put him on the list for. That that's funded by the government. Nope, this is a privately run building he lives in. So if such a system like I just described were to be put in place, I would want it run by the government because the long-term care system right now, the biggest problem is in the for-profit homes. A lot of the care is in the private sector, not the government. So I wouldn't want that to be repeated. But it kind of doesn't matter what I want because none of this exists, and these people live on the street. Now here's the number one reason that so many people with disabilities are homeless in Ontario. Average rent for a bachelor apartment in Ontario is $1,300 a month. Now that's going to vary wildly, but based on where you are in the province. But I think the cheapest, you know what? I don't even know because it's been a few years since I've looked. A few years ago, you could get a bachelor for around 700. It's probably worse than that now. But to bear that number in mind, $1,300. The government gives people with disabilities who receive ODSP, Ontario Disability Support Payments, which is what I receive. Those people are given $1,169 a month to live on. That's supposed to pay for your rent, your food, your toiletries, whatever your other needs are. Like, I don't even know what to say. It's absolutely ludicrous that this is what we are expected to live on. If you're wondering about subsidized housing, the wait list depends where you are in the province. The more populated parts of the province, you could be talking 10, 15, 20-year wait. I know of one place where it's 2 years, but this is a cottage country type area where there are more bears than people. So, if you want to actually live in the populous areas of the province, you're stuck on the street for decades potentially until you get into housing. So even if these people on the street don't necessarily need support and would be able to live independently, they can't. I live in my parents' basement because I can't afford to move out on that income. No one can afford to live on that income. So what I will say, if you can call it a positive, you do get some things covered when you're on ODSP. I get dental coverage, although it's not too extensive. So far, it's been fine. My prescription drugs are covered. They cover the eye exam, and they give you some money towards the eyeglasses. Now that's a big problem. They give you $43 towards the price of glasses frames. So a lot of people who need glasses on ODSP don't get them because that's not covering enough. When you're that broke and you have to pay most of it out of pocket, you can't do it. They do cover some medical type devices as well. Different like braces and I think mobility devices. I was able to get custom orthotic shoe insoles paid for, which surprised me, but I'll take it. So those are the quote unquote positives, that they do cover some of those expenses. But the amount of money they expect you to live on is absolutely ludicrous. And instead of helping the disabled, they're making them doubly marginalized because now they're also poor. And I could go on for an hour about how society doesn't like poor people. But I don't need to. I think that's a pretty known that poor people, are cheated and, have the worst, I'm forgetting how to speak English here. Lower life expectancies than people who have money, and all these statistics. I don't think I need to go off on a rant, but they're making us doubly marginalized. right? They're making people who are disabled now they're also poor. And poor people end up costing the system more because their health isn't as good, or because they're living on the street. Um, and poor people end up in the criminal justice system because they get so desperate for a needed thing that they shoplift it. And the worst thing that's going on right now is people on ODSP are starting to apply for MAID. MAID is medical assistance in dying. We do have euthanasia now in Canada. It's very, very limited. You have to be able to consent. You have to be able to meet a bunch of criteria to even be considered able to consent. And not everyone who applies gets accepted. But people are so desperate that they're trying. They can't afford to live. They're tired of being hungry. They're tired of being in poverty. So they're actually starting to apply to have their lives medically ended. The one bit of hope right now is CERB. CERB is I'm doing well tonight. Canada Emergency Response Benefit that was created by our federal Liberal government. Our Prime Minister is Liberal currently. Or I should say, current Prime Minister is Liberal. So he enacted this program to help people who were out of work or losing work hours because of the pandemic. And the amount that people get was set at $2,000 a month, which indicates that the government actually knows what life costs. That's considered the poverty line in Canada. And depending where you are in Canada, is still quite a tight budget to live on. But they know what it actually should be. So there's no excuse for having people in Ontario on this pittance. And the CERB amount has definitely lit a fire under people's feet. There's a lot more advocacy, all kinds of people coming out of the woodwork now. It's being brought up in Parliament. I have absolutely no hope that the current Premier of Ontario will do anything. He doesn't like disabled people, and you can't convince me otherwise. There was an incident when he was a city councilor where they opened a center for youth with autism in his neighborhood, and he flipped out about those people ruining his neighborhood or his ward or whatever. So I'm not optimistic that this guy is going to change anything, but eventually he won't be their premier anymore. And maybe this fire lit under, all these people's feet by CERB will eventually produce something. I have to cling to this hope because ODSP was created in the 90s and has gone up less than $300 in 20 something years. And I can tell you the cost of living, especially in the Toronto area, has absolutely skyrocketed in 20 years. Absolutely skyrocketed. It's not comparable at all to how much ODSP has gone up. So that seems to have lit a fire under these people's feet. So, wow, that's a lot. That's emotional. All right, so thank you for listening. Um, I'm going to climb down off my soapbox now, and I'll see you next month.